And to begin, I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then I'll be passing this over to Matt. So I acknowledge that I live on, work on, and enjoy the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Like the University of Waterloo's main campus, my home is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. I grew up across the street from the banks of the Grand River. It was my playground when I was a child and sometimes my refuge through my teenage years. Today, my active work toward reconciliation takes place in my heart and in the Center for Teaching Excellence here at Waterloo through learning, teaching, and community building. Embedding sustainability into assessments is one small piece of this work, and I would especially like to recognize past, present, and future caretaking by Indigenous peoples to sustain Mother Earth, endeavor to do so myself, and invite all of you to do so as well. And now I will turn this over to and welcome Matt Thijssen, Director of Sustainability here at Waterloo, to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm excited for the conversation today. And I thought I'd just kind of give some overall comments to start it off, and then I'd love to see how it progresses, and looking forward to the panel discussion as well. So I'm glad you shared the territorial acknowledgement at the beginning, and I've been seeing in all of the work that Waterloo has done in the past couple months and increasingly before that, the territorial acknowledgement also coming alongside the land acknowledgement, which is really tying beyond just the treaty recognition and the treaty rights. I think the deep spiritual and cultural and social connection that Indigenous communities have with the natural world, at least in the Canadian context, but in many places around the world as well. And so much of that tied with protection of the natural environment, and which is, of course, why Indigenous communities are on the front lines of so many of the fights that we have on the environmental protection space. So my work here at Waterloo obviously leans more on the environmental side, but I think it's a useful reminder on how intersectional these issues are when it comes to talking about sustainability. And I think we can extend that to almost all of the areas that we talk about as a campus, when we talk about anti-racism work, when we talk about Indigenous relations and wellness and gender equity, accessibility, peace and security, poverty. These are intimately connected issues, and really a stable and flourishing natural environment undergirds and underpins all of that. And I think we all get sort of trapped in our silos a little bit in terms of the specific topics and the issues that we tend to focus on. Again, the Sustainability Office primarily reflecting on the environmental kind of topics within that broad sustainability umbrella, but especially as we think back to these issues and the connections that they can have to the curriculum and the way that we teach things, these are so intersectional that it's important for everyone. When I was finishing my graduate studies here, it was through the Balsillie School, and a lot of what I was looking at was sort of the conflict and security side of things of environment, and the language is, of course, climate change is a threat multiplier. It takes every other social, economic, etc. Fault line in society and amplifies that in one way or another. And so I think back as we start the conversation, or continue in many cases the conversation on how we reflect on sustainability on the curriculum and the learning side, that this is going to impact every future career, every learning pathway. There isn't a discipline out there, and there's no career pathway that's going to be immune to the impacts of these big mega forces like climate change and biodiversity issues, and all of the social and economic things that come along with those. And so I think as we reflect on sort of the role that this plays in our learning environment, I think bringing that sense is really important. And I think it's in two ways, because every career is going to be impacted by those transitions, whether because we're succeeding at solving climate change or whether because we're failing. Again, every role is going to have some way of having to navigate what the world is going to change over the coming decades. And perhaps more excitingly, every position can also influence and can be a part of the transformation for the better. And so I think in what I would love to see at Waterloo is continuously more efforts to support our students on that learning journey and make sure that they understand in their sort of own unique way what is my career going to contribute to this. And it might be very niche, it might be very small, but there's always something there that has a connection. And so that's why, as some of you know, I'll just give a quick plug that the approval has been given to start a project on integrating sustainability across the curriculum. It's going to be a very sort of collaborative and interdisciplinary journey, but we're working with CTE. Faculty of Environment is participating, and I think there will be a larger community that gets brought together to say, like, what are the frameworks we can draw off of? We don't have to reinvent the wheel because it's been done in a lot of places, but how do we build it so that any program of study across campus can understand why is it relevant for my students? And that might look very different for an engineer than a public health professional, than a communications student, but there's a relevance piece there that I think we can't miss for everybody. So I'm excited to see where that goes. I think conversations like the one that we have today are a really amazing way to build off of some of the knowledge and the momentum we already have. I'm so thrilled to see Steffanie, Nadine, and Andrew, being able to share some of their reflections, because there's amazing work that's already happening at the course and at the program level. So I'm really thrilled that you're going to share some of that today. And CTE, thank you for organizing this. And really, if every job can be a climate job, I think your job can be, how do we foster these conversations around sustainability in the curriculum? So thank you for taking that on and creating a space like the one today to have this conversation. So I'll turn it back to you, but those are just my quick reflections, and really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Matt. And very exciting news as well about the approval for the embedding sustainability at the curriculum level. I think when we think about this, there's so many different levels we can approach it. And this creating this space today is really wanting to look at that course level and the assessment. So to introduce myself, my name is Julia Burke. I work at the Center for Teaching Excellence here at the University of Waterloo, and I am the faculty liaison for the Faculty of Environment and also part of the Faculty of Arts.
My name is Victoria Feth. I work at the Center for Teaching Excellence as the faculty liaison to arts, as well as the affiliated and federated institutions at Waterloo. And it's my pleasure today to welcome our three panelists. So with us today, we have Dr. Andrew McMurry of English Language and Literature, Dr. Steffanie Scott of Geography and Environmental Management, and Dr. Nadine Ibrahim of Civil and Environmental Engineering.
Well, I'm an English professor, so, sustainability is not something that's really a mandate for teaching in English or the humanities generally, but I've always been interested in it. And this is pertinent right now because I'm teaching a couple of courses in the winter. One is called Literature for an Ailing Planet. It's a course that I got on the books a number of years ago, but I haven't had a chance to teach. So I'm thinking a lot about assessments in that class. And my other class next term, a graduate course in environmental communication, also might be relevant to what I'm going to say. But I had to dig into my past to try to find some models for how I might teach that literature course. And I remembered that I had taught this course that you see here a number of years ago and really liked the assessments that I made and the structure of them. And I thought I could, repurpose them for the course in the winter. So I'll just tell you a little bit about this course. Now, this is a senior course, 481, so its focus was American literature, and I put my own spin on it, made it about nature and madness in American literature and culture. Well, what does that mean? I guess you can see some of it with that picture there, which is pretty out of control in a lot of different ways. But here's what I was doing in that class vis-a-vis evaluation assessment that I think might be interesting to us today. Now, the course description, I'll let you read it there, but the bottom line is the United States has produced a lot of cultural artifacts, literature included, that have valorized nature and the environment, and there certainly have been people who have come up with some wonderful principles for thinking about nature. Henry Thoreau, to speak of one, Aldo Leopold, another, Rachel Carson, and so on. So there are a lot of texts that will be very eloquent in speaking to the issue of nature and madness. But at the same time, the United States has produced an awful lot of the most egregious offenses against nature, you might say, in all kinds of ways that I won't go into, but that's going to be part of this course as well. But the real thing is, the real trick here was to get students interested in these topics, the sustainability or unsustainability of American culture, by making this course about them. So in the process of learning about these issues in American nature that are quite scary, I sweetened the bitter pill by making the projects in such a way that they were expressing findings about their self, what I call their environed agency. So we'll see what that all means here. Here's the sort of pitch that I gave to students, that in the course of this term, they would learn about themselves as sort of that green circle, and they're embedded in a variety of items, including their natural environment, but also their urban environment. They'd learn about their relationship, or they'd think about their relationship to animals, food sources, science, and so on. And they would come up with a project at the end, kind of a scrapbook that would enfold a number of smaller projects that they'd be doing to discover their environment agency. And I focused in kind of 4 ways on their own personal ego-related materials, their local ecological situation, the discourses that they were learning about in their university trajectory, their majors, and then the things that interested them in their cultural environment, the popular entertainment materials that they spent time with. Now, I gotta say, this is a course that I taught in 2004, so it's going to look a little bit weird, but I think it's still kind of possible to use these ideas today, 20 years later. Now, the readings are one example that I think are a little dated. We don't have Indigenous, we don't have Black authors in that list. We have sort of the standard chestnuts of American literary study of nature and nature writing. So that's going to change for my literature and the environment course next term. But these projects here are what are important and relate to our assessment issue today. These are small projects. I call them relays because they move students from a particular problem, a piece of writing on the left, towards considerations that are more personal. And they are gathered up, as I say, at the end into a kind of scrapbook. And I won't go into detail, but you can maybe make out sort of what we're getting at with some of those, like the manifesto and the food pyramid and so on. The Haibun is a kind of poetry assignment, write a little nature poetry. But this one cosmogram is the one I'll quickly talk about as the assessment that kind of gives you a sense of what I was doing. So this is a painting that represents in some ways the cosmogram. That's St. Jerome, famous fellow who pulled a thorn out of a lion's paw, and it followed him around faithfully throughout his life. You can kind of see the lion back there on the right, but St. Jerome is in his study with his most important things, his book of theology, or perhaps it's the Bible, his books, his knowledge. But he's got some peacocks and other animals in there that he's interested in. He's got some other items on the shelves that I think are important to him. Nature is kind of distant. You can see it out the back windows. He's probably more interested in those matters upstairs, out the blue sky, that kind of represent his transcendental interests. But in any case, what students were to do with their cosmogram is to design visually some sort of display that would, arrange the components of their environment that they thought were important in distant or proximate ways to that environment subjectivity. And these could take the form of diagrams or sketches, or in some cases, if they weren't artistically inclined, just short essays, and they would tote up, the kinds of items that were important to them. Might be anything from a particular object to a pet, obviously parents and community items, but also ideas, television shows, maybe the spirituality that they held dear. And so they would tote those up, and unbeknownst to them, in a later assignment, they would try to measure the environmental impact of these items in complicated ways, and in ways that couldn't always be assessed, but nevertheless they'd try. And at this time we had some ecological footprint guides by Wackernagel that had been superseded, I see, by online footprint calculators that they could have actually used. It would have been handy then. But in any case, I did that was one thing they did. And in terms of assessment, because a lot of these things were very personal, I didn't want to necessarily make them high value. So some were graded for completion, some had grades, but they were provisional. They could be upgraded later on. And ultimately, this entire project that I'm talking about would be assessed on the basis of those 5 bullet points at the bottom. And it comprised 70% of their grade, and the other 30 was a final exam of sorts. But in terms of sustainability, this was a first stab at trying to get those students to think about really the unsustainability of their lifestyles, because that's what it all led to in the end. This time in 2004, people maybe were not quite as conscious of those drivers and problems that Matt was speaking of. So today, or if then the theme of that course was all this madness could be put to good use, we could use these ideas and discoveries about the weight of their environment agency to do good, was the hopeful note. I think today, as I reshape this course, I'm going to have to kind of use the bottom quote there as the thematic guide. It's a little scarier. There's not an obvious hopeful note at the end, but we'll see what we can do. I don't want to leave these students in Literature for an Ailing Planet feeling like there's no cure, even if I have my own doubts.
Okay, so thanks everybody. It's a delight to be here and have a chance to share with you. This is a course, Geography and Environment and Resource Studies, Environment, Resources, and Sustainability. Now it's called 460, which is called Sustainable Food Systems in Waterloo Region, and I'm teaching it this term. It's the second time I've taught it, and the prerequisite for this, so just note, is a third-year course on food systems and sustainability. So they've already got a good grounding about food systems and sustainability, and here we're focusing specifically on this regional case study. This image on the cover on the first slide here is, I like it because it just highlights how food relates to so many different dimensions in our society and economy and ecology, and that's a big theme of both of those courses, really, is recognizing all those connections. And so when we think about sustainability relating to everything, food also likewise relates to so many of those pieces. So just a little bit about myself before I share more about the course. I've been involved for many years in research in China. There's a picture of me in a greenhouse close to Beijing, I think. And I've also been connected with this organization called the Food System Roundtable of Waterloo Region since it started in 2007. And so that's really given me all kinds of inspiration and connection to like initiatives and champions of food systems work around the region. And so, yeah, thinking about food systems and sustainability and really food as relationships has been a key inspiration for me, and that's infused in my community work and activism, as well as my research and teaching. So just to briefly tell you a little bit about the Roundtable, it's a nonprofit advocacy group working to create a sustainable food system in this region. Our work recognizes the value of local food sources and grassroots community food initiatives, especially in the context of climate crisis, decolonization, and working towards equity and food justice. So we foster support, advocacy, and community connections, research and education on food systems sustainability, with the goal to increase ecological and human wellness, as well as local food economic viability. I've got a few slides here that just say a little bit about what I mean by food system, because that's not a term that's necessarily kind of common parlance for everybody. This is a bit more of a complicated one, but I did like how it synthesizes a lot of pieces. It's probably really small on your screen, so just I'm not going to go through all of it, but just to say, you know, across the top, it's all these different dimensions from sociocultural, socioeconomic, demographic, geopolitics, and so on. Those are a lot of the different drivers that can affect our food system. Across the middle there, we have sort of the supply chain from, you know, agricultural practices and inputs to growing, to kind of distribution, to cooking and eating. And again, how those drivers also affect the outcomes around at the bottom in terms of socioeconomic outcomes, food security and nutrition outcomes, and environmental outcomes. So that's just kind of a snapshot of how we can envision a food system. Here's another one, maybe more simple, a little bit more easy to pick up on visually, of again thinking farming and fishing and distribution and retail, restaurants, households, urban agriculture, the role of kind of food recovery, composting, recycling, disposal, and then across the top thinking about government influence and kind of policy pieces. This is one that I put together as a kind of a framework for my third year food systems course, where we can think around the outside there, what we sometimes call sort of the actors or the stakeholders, and then in the blue, the different kind of dimensions, and then in the red, the different stages of the food supply chain. And then I also give some emphasis to the sort of personal connection to food and the land in our discussions in the course. And finally, this is a diagram that came from a thesis with more of an Indigenous focus about the land and food connections in this region. And so I liked the focus on place, responsibility, relationality, reciprocity, and then these different land-based knowledges and relationships in relation to growing, fishing, hunting, preserving, sharing, distribution, and seed saving. So again, many different ways that we can think about our food system. And so what I want to tell you about today is this term project. This is a picture from a week or two ago when I took my class out to an organic farm in Wellesley. It's called Fertile Ground. And so these field trips and the class overall are helping to give students inspiration for this term project, in which we are collectively developing a regional food strategy for Waterloo Region, which is going to be handed over to the Food System Roundtable, and the Food System Roundtable itself is wanting to do this on a much wider scale across the community if we're able to get some funding in the near future. And so, so what we're doing this semester is, so I've got the picture here of a document from Calgary. We've been looking at food strategies that have been developed in municipalities across the country. There's at least 23 already existing. And so we've been looking at those, and we've been looking at this model from a report that was done 10 years ago in Waterloo Region about the health of Waterloo Region food system. And so we're using the model and the kind of priorities that were outlined in that to give an update of what's happened in the last 10 years and what are some recommendations for change. And so the specific activities that students are engaging in are to do some background research, looking at reports, websites, news stories, social media of different initiatives and organizations and policies. And then they're actually going to go and consult with one or more community organizations, businesses, and other kind of key informants to hear about what is working for them, what are some, again, successes they've had, what are some challenges or barriers they're facing, and what kind of recommendations of restructuring and reforming our food system would help to support their work to support a healthy and sustainable food system. And so I think final thing I wanted to share with you. So I guess, yeah, finally, the challenge will be actually putting all that together, because they've done these dispersed lit reviews and we're trying to merge it all together in one document. We've got about 20 students and they're usually working in groups of 2 or 3. So I think the next few weeks will be the challenge to really try to synthesize all that material together. But one other inspiration, I just thought I'd make folks aware, is that there's a number of papers that have been published in recent years about an emerging signature pedagogy for sustainable food systems education. And I've shared this with Julia, and we were chatting about how even if you're not teaching about food systems per se, if you're teaching about sustainability, I think there's a lot of relevance to these points, because they are pretty, pretty relevant broadly for thinking about sustainability. So they are reviewing a number of food systems programs around North America to support post-secondary students across a range of disciplines to build their knowledge and skills and dispositions to effectively address complex changes and challenges in the food system. And so they're seeing how graduates will be able to engage in collective action towards transforming the food system, after they've been through these programs. And so these signature pedagogies are kind of conceptual models to think about the primary elements by which professional education in specific fields is designed and structured and implemented. And so specifically at the bottom here, they identify systems thinking and multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity, the use of experiential learning approaches, and participation in collective action projects as kind of the key elements of this signature pedagogy. And so I'm actually working with Julia and a couple of my students to try to put together a paper talking about how in my class, I'm using elements of this as well. So I think I will leave it there.
So I'm going to talk about sustainability ebooks by students. And I'm a lecturer actually in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And I'm also the Terpstra Chair in Urban Engineering. And that's really my research focus when it comes to infrastructure for sustainable cities. And through the course that I teach, and I'll get into it, it's a nice way to bridge both my teaching role and my chair position role. Okay, so when I was putting these slides together, it almost felt like in 10 minutes, I want to share with you this assessment experience, but it's almost like taking a photo of a beautiful moment and then sharing it with others, and it really doesn't capture, for example, the picture of the sea here, how warm the sun was, or how cold the water was, or what you could smell and what you could hear. So I'm going to try to do my best to also capture how the students really felt when they went through this experience and sort of the outcome of the project that they were working on. So a little bit about the course. It's a second-year core course for civil engineering students. So it's Civ 230, Engineering for Sustainable Development. And it used to be taught by several sessionals until I joined Waterloo in 2019 and have been teaching it in the spring term ever since. And the course is also listed as a technical elective for engineering students. So sometimes there are other programs in engineering that choose this course because it is also listed as an option for the diploma in sustainability, covering the environmental sciences category. So I teach this course about sustainability, both in a very qualitative manner, but also very quantitatively. So there are moments of teaching discussions, but also introductions to models and a lot of numerical calculations and modeling aspects of it. The course has diverse assessments, and I give an opportunity for students to really shine depending on the type of assessment that they are stronger at. So for example, some students in engineering really prefer the number crunching, others prefer more visual or a more discussion-based approach. So this diversity of assessments really gives something for everyone. In the middle here, I just give a snapshot of some of the topics that are covered in the course. So it starts off being a very siloed approach to topics. So climate change, air quality, water resources, energy, waste, etc. And then it all comes together when we talk about sustainable buildings and sustainable transportation or sustainable energy and water use, etc. So the way it's structured is that they learn about the pieces and then they bring it all together in the urban and the built environment. So this is where a little bit of some of my research influencing the way I teach as well. I just have just the demographics of some of the students. This is specific to spring 2020, which is when COVID first hit, and it was the first term that we were going fully online. It was a dark term now that I look back. Teachers, professors, staff, students, nobody really knew what we were up against, but we all gave it our best. So in this particular year and term, there was 126 civil students. They were in their second year, and there was management engineering students, and there was about 21 of them that are in their fourth year and taking it as their technical elective. So I'll jump right into the assessment. Students were asked to make a sustainability contribution, and it was going to be structured as one PowerPoint slide that has a visual and some text, and they were asked to pick a city of their choice and highlight a sustainability innovation. Now, the way the submission works is that it was going to be staggered throughout the term. Every week we cover a different topic. So in the table here, I show where if the student's ID ends with 0, they would be submitting in week 3, and their due date is there, and that is the topic of focus. The following week, it's the students with IDs ending in 1, and it's a different topic with a different due date. So there's always an influx of submissions, and I'm the one grading them. And so the TAs were assigned different assessments, but I reserved this one for myself to go through it, especially because it was the first time I was introducing this project. I really wanted something to bring the class together. Aside from our typical quizzes and assignments and final exams, I wanted something different. And this was sort of the creative approach to sustainability, in that the students will be submitting a slide. Everybody will be submitting one, and they'll be compiled together into an ebook at the end of the term. And this ebook will be sort of a souvenir or a takeaway of the course. Sometimes when we look back and see what do we really have at the end of our courses, it's usually our course notes, maybe some graded assignments or tests or exams. So this was going to be a nice takeaway that they get to keep, and they get to reference as well, since they are all co-authors, they're contributors to this ebook. So it was very important that the submission be very structured. It's very prescriptive. There's a template that they will all have to follow, and they are aware that these submissions will form an ebook. So it has to follow this template. And you'll see here just these lines just showing where the title should go, what color it should be, or can they choose a different color, the size of the image. They were all asked to look for images that are licensed by Creative Commons so that it could be reused and republished, fonts, etc. So everything was laid out for them, and they just had to follow the template. And the template was actually provided to them as well. Also in the spring 2020, there was a survey that was sent out to the students, sort of asking them, where has sustainability been introduced in their courses, in their co-op opportunities that they've had so far, or even in their everyday life. And we pulled some of the quotes from these surveys as a way to just add to the personal content in the ebook that's being produced. So this is what the ebook looks like. So this is the spring 2020 edition, and it was created by students. So in total, it was about 140 students in the class. It is free, and it's a downloadable PDF, and it contains more than 100 examples of sustainability in cities, because each student was free to choose a city of their choice and highlight a sustainability innovation based on the sustainability topics that were presented in the course. And this is now placed in the OER Commons, which is where the Canadian Engineering Education Association has a group. And I personally post a lot of the open education resources, and a few of my colleagues at the Canadian Engineering Education Association do the same. I know it was linked in the abstract for this session, but I'll also drop it in the chat as soon as we're done. So here's just an example of what one of the pages from one of the students' contributions look like. It has the image This one happens to be Copenhagen in Copenhagen in Denmark. And you'll see here, there's a quantitative approach to identifying what is being targeted in terms of components of the environment, and a little bit of a description of the city and the sustainability or innovation itself. So it serves as great examples. I've then sort of used this book with my colleagues in the department to say, are you interested in an energy example? I have a book for you. You can use it in your lectures, or you can use it as examples depending on what you're presenting. And so far, it's almost been just an individual effort of reaching out to my colleagues and just letting them know that these examples exist in most cities around the world, and covering most of the topics that are covered in our department. So the following year, I got a little bit more ambitious and still wanted to keep this ebook project, but this time I thought, let me get them to also map it to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now they're introduced to them, they're aware that each of these goals have targets, and they have very quantitative and measurable targets. And there's also happening at the same time the Canadian Engineering Grand Challenges, where engineering deans in Canada distilled a lot of these global goals into those that have an engineering focus and have also a little bit of a Canadian-centric focus as well. So I had students try to map what they were doing to these two frameworks. So it's a similar structure to the project, but this time on the left, they are to identify a problem, so a challenge in a Canadian city, and they were encouraged to try to cover all 13 provinces and territories and try to give themselves an additional challenge, maybe by looking at Indigenous communities. And they identify, if you can see my cursor, well, they can identify the Canadian Engineering Grand Challenge that it speaks to. And on the bottom right here, they identify a sustainability innovation from a different city around the world. And they identify the Sustainable Development Goals that it touches upon. So the challenge was about 300 words. And the solution from a different city was 300 words. And then at the bottom here, for example, what can Richmond learn from Rotterdam? It's a little bit on the city-to-city learning, that there's a lot to be learned between cities among the world. And in 2022, took a different approach, kind of let go of the Canadian Engineering Grand Challenges, and I really wanted them to dig deep into one city. So this time, the template looks slightly similar, but there are also differences. They identified a challenge and they identified a solution still within the same city and mapped it to the Sustainable Development Goals. This time, the class contributed to the title of the book, and they chose The Engineers of Tomorrow Showcase Global Sustainable Cities, Dear 2030, Sincerely the Class of 2025, with a lot of these goals having a 2030 target. So those are the 3 books that have been produced throughout the years, and every year I try to come up with a different take on it. So I'm still thinking what the 2023 version would look like, but I think I'm going to keep it and try to include some of my colleagues as well for the next iteration, so that they could actually be reused in a more intentional manner in other courses in the department. And I just have a link here to what the OER Commons website looks like and how they're listed. You'll see on the left here just the various categorization of engineering. It is engineering specific, but doesn't need to be. And just to say thank you to the large labor force that have been a part of making this happen. It's the teaching assistants that really put in some hours, the class reps that also contribute a little bit of time to pulling it together into an ebook format. And during COVID, we had these OLAs, the online learning assistants, and after that, we had the course and technical support assistants. And I've also hired some co-op students in some terms to put it together. So with that, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Julie and Victoria.